Yo, what's up, y'all? Hope y'all still good on those positive vibes. Checking in from my garage today, and I'm gonna be showing y'all my ATEM case, or my ATEM build that I end up constructing after going through a couple different renditions of not only a smaller case, but a smaller setup. So just to give you a quick background on where I started, I had the original ATEM. It was dope, it served its purpose, but I wanted to be able to record ISO tracks for all of the cameras that I had plugged into the ATEM. If you know anything about ATEMs, if you have the original, you can't record ISOs without having the ISO version of the ATEM. So I immediately upgraded probably months in from the original ATEM to the ATEM Mini ISO. And it was dope too. But then I started running into other, walls and barriers that I needed to try to find a way around. I needed to be able to send multiple outputs. I needed to be able to monitor the audio through headphones, and the ATEM Mini ISO is very, very dope and it's right, but if you need those two things, you already got to think about upgrading once again to the ATEM Extreme ISO, which is where I'm at right now with this entire case. I'm gonna work from the top rack to the bottom rack with explaining how everything is, but before I do that, let's talk about the outside of it. I'm using a Gator case, and this is what the front of it looks like. I have a front and a back. You have two of them, and they just sit on the front like that, and there's some latches on the side. You latch them like that. That's how everything stays, covered. One thing I will say about this case, though, that I wish was available would be some type of locking mechanism. I just traveled, and I had to use like ratchet straps, and I used these other straps that I strapped around the case as well, because I was terrified that it was gonna get really banged up on the flight. It held its own, but I really do wish it was some type of way to have locks on the latches on the side. Other than that, I love the case. It has wheels on it, has a pull-out handle. It's been very sturdy so far. So starting at the top, I have a pull-out monitor, and I'm gonna go ahead and open it. All you have to do is, it's these little turn screws on the side. You'll feel it eventually kind of pop. And then all you do is pull the monitor out, and then you're gonna turn it up. And that's how that layout goes. You have a C-Tech 17-inch monitor, 17.5-inch monitor. It's been very, very solid as well. I mean, for what it's worth and for where it's located in the case, it serves a purpose easily. Now let's go to the second part of the rack. I have a Sound Devo, and this is a power conditioner and sequencer. Now what I'm using this for is everything in this case, other than the fan, and I believe maybe like the bi-directional boxes, are powered through this actual power conditioner. So the monitor, the actual ATEM switcher, your hyper deck, all of that stuff is gonna be running directly into the rear of this power conditioner inside of the case. The reason why I opted to do that was because I didn't wanna get to the gigs and have to run 30 cables like I typically would do. Now I get there, I plug up one power cable that's going to this box, and I'm good to go. Even my Ethernet switcher, my port switcher that's inside of the case, as well as my USB switcher, all of that stuff is being powered in some way, shape, or form off of this power conditioner. So as soon as power is turned on, everything is going, everything is up and running. The other part about it, or the second part about it, with it being a sequencer, I also have the option of having certain things turned on first or certain things turned off last. If you're doing any type of audio or television, video type stuff, sometimes certain things need to be turned on before the other, because you don't want to have currents running certain ways. It could get real deep. We'll talk about that in another show, okay? I have had some great luck with this one as well. I like the fact that it has a USB port on the front, as well as it gives me two other outputs on the front of it. So, if I need to plug up a lamp or something like that to be able to see if it's a dark venue, or even if it's something as simple as I need to power my cell phone, I can run all that stuff right here off of the power conditioner on the front, and I'm good to go. Now let's move down to part 3 of the rack. On this right side, you'll see it just says Blackmagic Design. This is actually their rack that they sell. I will tell y'all this, it costs it costs more than enough. I'm not gonna say more than it should cost, but yeah, if you're building out a case and you start using the Blackmagic things, it can get a little bit tricky. And you know, I ended up getting the Black Magic one because I wanted things to actually fit. You know, I could have got a regular open rack and, you know, use Velcro straps and just strap the hyperdeck down, but I wanted everything to kind of sit in there perfectly. I wanted the screws to line up to be able to screw it up under the bottom so it's not shifting. So that's where the Black Magic rack came into play. So on the right side, that's empty. I like the fact that it comes with these front panels where you can just have those there to fill the space so it's not just an open area. But on the rear side, I have like the main power plug and adapter to the ATEM that's sitting behind this. But once again, with this front panel on there, it gives you a chance to keep it real nice, tidy, and clean looking, which is a plus. Now on the left side, what I have on this side is my hyperdeck. Now this hyperdeck, the way I have it connected, you can use it for recording or playback. I'm mainly using it as a backup for recording. Now, if you're, into using the ATEM, whether it's the ATEM Mini or the ATEM Mini Extreme ISO, you already know that you're capable of not only recording your switcher file, but your ISO tracks as well. And that's cool and that's dope, but man, I'm this person that's always trying to worry about the what if, so I think a little bit ahead. So I try to make sure that I'm having at least one type of backup for everything. So when it comes to audio, I want to back up in that space. And when it comes to video, I want to back up there as well. So what's happening with my hyperdeck, I have the option to record to SD cards, which has worked flawlessly as well. And I have everything set up to where when I connect my laptop and whatever else I'm using, I can just use one of my macro buttons and I have it programmed to start not only the ATEM, but it starts the hyperdeck as well. So that's been pretty dope. Now for audio purposes, to record a backup, I'm typically doing one or two things. I might take like my Zoom H6, or I might take my Sound Devices Mix Pre 6, which is my personal preference. And what I'll do, I'll run a cable to the Mix Pre 6, and I'll run a cable also to the back of this case. So the audio will be going to two separate locations and it's giving me an immediate backup. I know everybody doesn't do that and you don't have to do it. That's not me saying you have to do it. It's just more so on my side, I try to play it safe and have some type of backups, because when you're doing live streaming gigs or any type of recording for a client, the last thing you want to happen is something fail or recording stop, which it will happen in some capacity at some point in your career. You want to have a backup in place just in case. So that's my only reason for doing that. Finally, on the bottom of the case, you have a pull-out rack, and that's where the ATEM SDI Extreme ISO is located. And I mean, that's the gist of the case so far. We're gonna flip it around in a second and I'll show you the rear of the case so you can see how I have everything laid out. But man, for a simple case to be able to run 8 inputs, 4 outputs, I mean, it's super clever, man. I really like how it all turned out. Construction wise, it might have taken me a little bit over a month to do because, well, maybe even 2 months. I did some trial and error. Some places you try to cut corners and then you find out later on that you can't cut that one corner. For me, it was like my SDI cabling that I was using, because I knew I had the need for a lot of cables, because it's like, okay, I have my 8 inputs for cameras that are gonna be SDI, but I also need the 4 output cables for SDI too. So, you're already talking about a nice amount of SDI cables, and depending on if you're gonna get, whatever G's that you need, 3G cables or whatever, 12. Like, I know some people go to the max with the cables, but for me, it was trying to be cost effective, but I didn't want to lose quality. So my first go round, I found cables that were super dope, but they were cheap. And the downside of that was the fact that I ended up having dropout issues with video. And I immediately found out that, okay, cool, you know what? These cables, even though these people are saying they're high quality and 4K and all this kind of stuff, they weren't carrying the video files over from the camera to the case like I need them to. And that was short run cables too. Like, we talking about 3 feet, 6 feet. It wasn't anything crazy. So I knew immediately, like, okay, hey, no, we gotta take the case all apart and put better cases in there. I mean, put better SDI cables in there. So the cabling was a little bit of a task at first. And then the same goes for your audio stuff too, because you can find cheap audio cables anywhere these days. I don't care if it's a Guitar Center. I don't care what what shop you might shop with on Amazon. It's very easy to find cheap audio cables. If you're gonna put a case like this together, I'm just gonna be straight up with you. Try not to go cheap on your cables because they're gonna be they're gonna be very important. You don't want your audio to be cracking and sounding weird and crazy. You also don't want it to be picking up on just any kind of interference, or if it's, sometimes you might touch a cable and you can hear the current going through it. You don't want any of those problems. So when I did my cabling the first go round with my audio stuff, which you'll see on the back that I converted everything to be XLR running into the case, I had a couple issues. And what was crazy was the first cables that I bought, they weren't cheap, but I ended up having to buy some more expensive cables. So that's the front of the case. You have the monitor, you got your power conditioning sequencer. On the left side, you have your hyper deck, and then just on the pullout rack, you have your ATEM SDI Extreme ISO. And I mean, I like it a whole lot. Now, I know someone is gonna ask like, hey, how do you connect your computer and your hard drive? This bottom rack pulls out far enough, and I have like these little stickies on the bottom of the ATEM so I can lift it up if I need to, but it extends far enough to, you can see that I can reach back here. I can undo cables if I need to. I could just reach right here, and I typically just have a cable here sitting on this side the same way I do with the audio. I just don't have it in right now for this purpose of this video. So, all right, so we talked about the front. Let's go ahead and break down the rear of this case. And just to let you know, I constructed this whole thing from scratch. The back of this case was just open. None of the panels were there. The ports, everything, the HDMI ports, the Ethernet in and out ports, the audio ports, how I ran the power cable coming out of the rear of the case. All of this stuff was constructed from scratch for the most part. I didn't build the racks, but end up having to construct them and put them together. So I'll do the same. I'll start at the top of the rack and work my way down. Now, the top part of the rack, you can see it still look like it's kind of open. And the reason why it looks like that is because that monitor extends the entire case. You got to remember that that monitor has to go inside of the case. So the back of this part at the top of the rack is literally the rack part from the actual monitor. The good part about it, it's still stuff on the back of it that I can use if I needed to. Like I can do a loop out. It's an SDI out that's available. It's an HDMI in that's available. You have stuff like DVI, VGA. You also have audio and video ports and a headphone jack and a USB upgrade port as well, just in case you need to use that. I have an SDI in plugged into that because that's how I'm running SDI straight to this monitor. I do like the fact that I have the option to run HDMI if I need to, but once again, if you're running HDMI versus SDI cables, it's a lot easier to manage and manipulate a very slim SDI cable over an HDMI cable. Because if I had an HDMI cable plugged into the top, I can guarantee I might not be able to put the back of this case on because it's gonna be big, bulky, and then you gotta try to loop it back in. Rather than how I did with the SDI, I got a 90-degree angle on the SDI and ran it right back across the top of the monitor, down the side, and ran it to the back of the ATEM or, the bi-directional box from Blackmagic that's inside as well. This second panel is blank. Now what I use that for, it's only two screws on here. I leave that like that because if, for instance, at a gig, I need to open up this case, something slid out of the way, something fell, a cable came out, that gives me the option to just unscrew those really quick, pull that rack off, and be able to go right into the case and adjust whatever is needed to be adjusted. This next panel, it's 16 SDI ports on here. I'm only using 12 at the moment because you have your 8 inputs, just like on the back of the ATEM, and you have your 4 outputs. Same thing as the rear of the ATEM. With the other 4 right now, I'm leaving those available because I'm going to eventually add more bi-directional boxes and be able to give myself more outputs. But right now, 4 outputs is totally fine. Now let's move down to this bottom rack. Now we have a couple things that's coming into play here. You have Ethernet on your far left, and what's happening over here is these ports are plugged into an actual switcher that's inside of the case as well, right here on the bottom. So that port is gonna give me 4 different outputs, and it's gonna give me 1 input just in case I'm somewhere at a gig and I can run a 100-foot Ethernet to their box. I can run it right to my case, and now everything in my case is gonna take that same IP address, which is gonna put everything on the same network once again, working easily with my Stream Deck or anything else that you might be using to man the battle station when you out here running these gigs. I only have 2 Ethernet outputs on the rear of the case because the other 2 are already taken by one going to the ATEM, and then the other one is going to the back of the hyperdeck. Because once again, all of that stuff has to be on the same network in order for it to talk to each other. So if you have something plugged up and it's not talking to each other, they're probably not on the same network. That one switcher box allows me to just plug everything into that box. As long as it's plugged into there, all of it's gonna start taking the same thing and it will be able to talk to each other, which is clutch. Let's move to the HDMI. Now, I told you earlier that I'm not really using too much HDMI here, but I do have HDMI capabilities. Right now, there are only 2 that are active, mainly because I'm going to add some extra bi-directional boxes down the line that are gonna give me access to these other 3. In the end, my focus or my thought process is to be able to not only take SDI, but HDMI cameras as well if needed. So I'm gonna have 3 available, and the other 2 right now are connected to the bi-directional boxes as outputs. So for instance, if I have a monitor that only takes HDMI, I have a way to run a line to that monitor still, and I can still control what's going over that HDMI, because those 2 bi-directional boxes, once again, they're plugged into, whatever it is, 3 or 4 output on the back of the ATEM. So now I can say, hey, over output 3, send program, over output 4, send multi-view, just for whoever's looking at those monitors. That's how I'm using that right now. But like I said, in the future, the plan is to connect 2 to 3 more boxes and be able to connect them to the inputs of the ATEM, so I can have HDMI cameras that can go into the case as well. Far right, the last thing, I have audio 1 and audio 2. And what these are ports that are connected to the input on the back of the ATEM. If you have an ATEM, you already know you don't have XLRs on the back. So I'm running just some very stable and good cables that are going from XLR to 1/8 inch jack, or headphone jack, like most people call it, to the back of the ATEM. All right, so let's open up the rear of the case really fast. I wanna give y'all a chance to be able to see what's inside and kind of get a quick glimpse on how I constructed everything and how I ran cables. Another thing that's inside of this case that I didn't mention yet would be a fan. I know some people are building cases like this one, and you're not putting a fan on the inside. I'm not saying you have to, but you're running a lot of stuff that's gonna be building up a lot of heat. So I would say just be mindful of that, because it's probably gonna be a situation where something is capable of overheating, and the last thing you want to happen is that to do that at a gig. So be mindful of that. And I know I said I was gonna take off that one panel, but I'm gonna go ahead and take off the SDI panel as well, because I want you guys to really be able to get a look inside of the rear of my case to see what is doing what. Now, another thing that I took time to do, which isn't something that you have to do either on your side, I labeled my cables, and I did that because it's nothing worse than just a million cables running all kind of ways and you don't know what goes where. So for me, I ended up actually labeling all of my cables to be able to see everything. So now you can see right here that all of these cables have labels on it. So I know what output is what, output 1, output 2, all of these labeled, input, input, input. And then I color coded them as well, so I know what's going where. You can see the back of the Ethernet cables, those blue cables. And then right there below the sliding rack, you can see the actual switcher I have. It's a TP-Link. I have the TL-SG105E gigabit switch port. That's what I'm using. And you can see on the back of it that all of the Ethernet cables are plugged in there as well. So yeah, that's the rear of the case for the most part. Sorry for some of the shaky footage. I wanted to really break the case down so you guys can, see inside there for real, for real. I hope it gave y'all some ideas on your side of how you can construct things and make your own switcher case and bring it to life. And I don't know, do some cool stuff. So lastly, I'm going to turn everything on so you get a chance to see how it all looks when it's powered up. I already plugged in that one cable, so now all I have to do is hit the power switch right here on the power conditioner, and it'll start to cycle everything. You'll see that light come on. You'll see the ATEM is powering up right now. Boom, that's up. You see the monitor is gonna come on next, and then the HyperDeck is starting to power up as well. So that's that, y'all. Hope this helps somebody. And hopefully y'all enjoyed it. I know if you're into the ATEM and the switcher type stuff and doing live streaming, this probably gave you a lot of ideas. So I hope it was something cool for y'all. All right, y'all keep pushing, keep fighting, stay on the positive vibes. And as always, good luck. I'll see y'all next go round, man. Talk soon.